The trip took me to all 50 states. It took me from the Caribbean to the other side of the international date line. It took me from north of the Arctic Circle to south of the equator.
So if you look at the title of this episode and think, oh, cool, this guy, Andy Magee, traveled to all the really big national parks in a year, like the Grand Canyon, Great Smoky Mountains, Yosemite, Yellowstone, all those kinds of places in a whole year, that's pretty neat. But yeah, he did do that, but he also did a heck of a lot more than that, because he didn't only travel to the big national parks, is what they're called. He traveled to every location that is operated and maintained by the National Park Service. This includes everything from national memorial sites, national historical sites, recreation areas, reserves, preserves, national parkways even. I mean, the list goes on. National seashores, rivers, scenic trails. Let's see, scenic rivers and riverways. And there's like a miscellaneous category in everything from battlefields and you just incredible stuff, military bases that are, historical markers now. So it really is a vast array of locations. And when you add them all together, the National Park Service, which definitely is in charge of the national parks, which is probably their most famous part of their inventory, I guess you could say, there ends up being over 400 of these places. When Andy did this trip back in 2019, there were 418 individual locations that he visited in a matter of a year. Now there are 422, and still, I don't know if he's going to have to add those to his list, but he did them all at the time in a calendar year, which is a hard task because it's all more than one a day. And man, if there's any trip that I've ever just really wanted to do, it's this one. If you don't know, I did this big bike trip many years ago where I biked to like 30 national parks, big national parks on my bicycle, and I just rode from one to the other. And it was probably one of the most life-changing experiences of my life to see just how vast and different America is culturally, visually, and just honestly how incredible so many people in this country are and around this world are who come to visit these places. So I'm a huge fan of the national parks. It's probably my biggest passion in my life. I love them, and it's cool to talk to somebody who also shares that. But also, before we get started, thank you to everybody who has become a Patreon recently and supported us financially. If you'd like to learn more about that, just go to patreon.com and you can search like Adventure Sports Podcast. So thank you to everybody that's done that. And also thanks to everyone who has left us a review recently. We're getting close to 700 episodes. So it's cool to see a bunch of new folks finding us and showing their love and saying how much they love the show. So, if you want to do that, that'd be awesome. And all right, here is the episode. Andy, welcome.
Thank you, Mason. Very nice to be here.
Yeah, so I always ask this first. Where are you coming from today, and where is home?
I'm sitting in my home in St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, very cool. I didn't realize you were from St. Louis.
That's right. I'm in the Midwest.
What an adventure you had.
Yes, that's true. I did have an adventure.
So, all right. So, folks heard a little bit about it in the intro that I record them before I release the show, just make sure I get all my facts right. But what gave you the idea to go to all the national park sites in 1 year? In 1 year, I mean, that averages more than one a day. So that's just a crazy pace. What made you want to do that?
It is. It is a crazy pace, and it's not necessarily a great way to visit the parks, but I wanted to do something a little challenging and a little different, personally challenging, and I'd had a difficult 2018, a lot of personal upheaval in my life. I got divorced and some other things, and I was just at a point in late 2018 where I just needed a change of pace for my own sanity, and so I decided to uh, do this crazy idea. I had no idea if it could be done. I had no idea if I could do it, if it was possible. But I just decided that I needed some time away and I needed to focus on something that I really enjoyed. And one of those things, one of my lifelong passions has always been the national parks and our public lands here in the United States. And so um, I knew that I had visited, I don't know, somewhere around 100 and 120, maybe a little bit more of the park units before in my lifetime, some of them many, many times. And I just got to thinking, what if I just tried to see them all? I didn't even know how many there were at the time, but I thought it would be an interesting challenge and a real good excuse to just sort of get away and have some time alone for a while.
Jeez, man. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. It's probably one of my biggest passions too. Is the national park system. Obviously, it's all tiered. With the national parks, and you've got all sorts of other national sites. And I'm sure when you saw the whole list, you were like, "Holy cow, that's a lot of them." Because when you did it, it was 419. I think it's up to 422 now.
Yeah, I think we're at 423 today. We just added a new one this week, or last week, as a matter of fact, the Merle and Medgar Evers House. But yeah, I once I looked at the list, I was just kind of floored. I didn't realize, I don't think, even spending decades in exploring the park system, I didn't realize how diverse it was, how broad it was. I didn't realize there were so many sites that I had already like driven past, half a dozen times and never stopped at. Um, and the other thing I didn't realize was that there are national park unit sites in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, obviously, and 4 United States territories. And so that really got me excited because at that point before the trip, I still had maybe 10 states that I had never visited before. And so the idea of, actually seeing the entirety of the United States plus 4 of our 5 territories, just that excited me tremendously. So once I started looking into it really quickly, I got super enthused and I just thought this is going to be the greatest, adventure of a lifetime, a great challenge logistically and personally. And, but just, I started to get really excited about all the possibilities and all the incredible things I could see along the way.
Wow. I mean, it's such a vast array of things. Obviously the national parks that people are familiar with, it's the vast beauty, and those are diverse as can be. But then you start throwing in the historical aspect, the battlefields, the seashores, the recreation areas. I mean, essentially an amazing cross section of everything American, everything for world history, even just so many iconic things you were going to experience in that year at such a crazy pace. That was how did you even begin planning a route? Like, what did that look like? Obviously you started to fit it all in a calendar year. You started January 1st. What did planning look like, and how many iterations of maybe the route did you go through until you landed on one?
I once I decided to do the trip, I bought a nice map that had all of the park units on it, and I framed it up and I hung it on the wall right above my computer at my desk, and so I could sit and stare at the map and do the research on the computer all at the same time. And I spent a lot of time just looking up at that map and imagining different routes, things like that. What happened though is that pretty quickly on, I realized that in order to do what is basically just a gigantic road trip of the United States, you needed to have a lot of flexibility. And if you tried to plot it out, day by day, or even, this park and then that park and then that park, you're bound to screw it up because there are so many unforeseen events that could happen, bad weather, vehicle problems, illness,
Government
emergencies,
shutdown.
a government shutdown. so so I recognized really quickly that I had to be flexible. Plus, I wanted to have the option to spend longer or shorter amounts of times at different places depending on circumstances. And but within that, there are a few things that I knew for sure. So I knew that I was starting on January 1st. Well, I live in the Midwest and it's cold here. So I didn't want to be doing a lot of traveling and outdoors stuff in the Midwest where it was cold. So I decided to start the trip in southern Florida, and I began at Dry Tortugas National Park, which is on an island way out in the Gulf of Mexico. It's one of the last of the chain of keys, Florida Keys, and it's one park that I had never been to before and had been wanting to go for a long time. And the other reason is because it's not on the way to anywhere else. It's like way out there by itself, and there's one way in and there's one way out. And so I thought this would be a good place to start. So I knew that I would be doing, Florida and the southern states in the winter time. And then as the weather started to get warmer throughout the year, I would sort of be switchbacking up the continental US in latitudes back and forth across the country, more or less. Um, I also realized that there were going to be a couple of chunks of the trip that were logistically much more complicated. And I started to call those the Caribbean leg, the Alaskan leg, and the Pacific leg. And I decided one of the smartest decisions I made in the planning stages was to hire a travel agent to help me plot out those three sections in particular. Because there's a lot of air travel and boats and lodging and this and that. And I just didn't want to be personally responsible for getting all of that right because I probably wouldn't have. Um, so that helped a lot. And I sort of had, I had the Caribbean leg came in January. The Alaskan leg came in the middle of the summer, and the Pacific leg came at the end of the year in December. And so those three chunks really kind of helped to bookend large parts of the trip. And the rest of it was just me driving around the continental US.
That I was going to ask you how you made those more challenging national parks fit within that frame, because those exponentially more difficult to visit. The Virgin Islands or Dry
Right.
Tortugas, Samoa, Hawaii, and Alaska. Those, I mean, there's just so much space, and obviously air travel and a lot of island national parks, and just way out
Yes.
there
Yes.
locations. And it's I mean, it must have been crazy trying to fit it all, trying to stay organized with it all, honestly.
It was, part of it was very logistically challenging. And there were definitely times of the trip where I was, sort of glued to a very precise itinerary, trying to hit flights and things like that. But the vast majority of it was much more relaxed and much more loose. I mean, there were so many mornings, I can't even tell you, where I would wake up and get around and literally just look at the atlas and figure out where the next nearest park was, and that's where I would drive to. And I'd stay as long as I wanted. And then, so there were a lot of days like that. Because the whole thing is stretched out over a whole entire year, it never really felt super stressed or intense at any given moment.
That's good. Because to me it did seem it seemed like a breakneck pace. I was obviously following your Instagram, beautiful pictures. So I mean it was just so cool to see your stamps every day. I saw the first stamp you missed was actually a DeSoto Memorial
Yeah,
Site.
that's right. That's
and I,
right.
I live right next to it, right there.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and I,
Okay.
I was like, I scrolled all the way back today, got kind of getting ready for the interview, and I was like, let me see him because he obviously hit that one, and it's a really small one. I actually just visited. We just moved here, and I was like, wow, this is a really small park. But Andy went to this. He drove through here just to see this, and sure enough, you said something about missing or it was closed, government shutdown, and all that. But yeah, man, you went way out of the way for some really small little locations. How did it feel? You said the pace wasn't too bad throughout the whole year. Was that true? Really, most of the time, was there ever times of intensity with trying to keep up?
Um, the beginning of the trip was hectic because, of course, I had done all this planning for a few months anyway, and then right before I was about to set out for the trip, we had that government shutdown in late December 2018, and I didn't panic, but I got really worried because I was afraid that it was going to stretch into my trip and that was going to screw things up. Um, what I didn't realize was that it was going to stretch into the trip and take up most of the month of January. And so once I got into it, it was really frustrating. I had the first week or so was really very good. When I got down to southern Florida, the parks were technically open because they were being staffed by a nonprofit agency that was filling in the gaps where the rangers would have been. So the visitor centers were open, some of the facilities were open, and you could access the parks. After a few of those, I started to run into parks that were closed, and you're right. DeSoto National Memorial was the first one that I visited that was just closed, and then after that, it was about 3 weeks of closed parks, just one after another. I think there were about 30 of them that I hit altogether that were just closed, inaccessible, and then the government reopened, and I sort of got back on track. But it was late January when that happened, and I didn't know. I mean, I'm a pretty tenacious person, and I'm kind of a completionist, and so I knew I had it in me to try to go back to all those places. And I didn't know if I would screw up my larger schedule and the trip if I did, but I did it anyway. And so I spent a lot of February driving back through the southern states and hitting a lot of those parks that were closed when I was there the first time. And in short, I ended up pulling it off. But that time of the year, that part of the trip, the beginning, first couple of months, they did seem a little hectic. And the other sort of thing is that I was just starting out on this, and I really didn't have a very good sense of what kind of pace I should be keeping. And so I think I was probably moving along a little quicker than I needed to be anyway. But it all worked out.
Yeah, talk about flexibility, being able to, I mean, that it just seems like you'd have to have it so dialed in, but to be able to just double back and hit a bunch of places that were closed because of an unforeseen shutdown, that's yeah, kudos to you for with the plan, and that's incredible. So let me ask you this, before we get into, some of your favorite parks and some experiences out there, what did you do with all that time in your truck? Did you listen to stuff? Did you just sit in silence? That's a lot of time driving.
Uh, you know, I normally wouldn't have done this, but I ended up listening to the news a lot in the truck, especially that first couple of months, because the shutdown was like it was consuming all of my time and energy, and every day I was sort of constantly rejuggling the trip to try to work around the shutdown as best as I could. So I was really glued to the news, just looking for any glimmer of hope that it would end. Um, so I did that a lot. But after that, I listened to a lot of music and things like that. I'm quite comfortable to sit in the truck and drive by myself for long periods of time, and I can do it all day long. Well, apparently I can do it all year long. So.
That's great, man. So what was your sleeping arrangement? Were you camping in the truck? Were you getting hotels? What did that look like for most of the year?
As A little bit of everything. I didn't intend to sleep in the truck. I'm a big fan of car camping, and so I had lots of camping gear in the truck, and I camped at a lot of campgrounds, both within the parks, mostly within the parks. Ended up doing a lot of hotels, more than I anticipated, but it was fine. Got lucky with a few cool lodges in some of the bigger parks here and there, and actually only ended up having to sleep in the truck 3 nights out of the whole trip. One of them was on the way up to Alaska. One of them was in the parking lot of the Anchorage airport, and one was on the way back from Alaska.
All in Alaska or near Alaska.
Yeah, all in Alaska.
Jeez.
That's right.
Tell us about, kind of what were some of the earliest best experiences of the trip. I'm sure, it's hard to rank the experience based on which park you went to, but there has to be like an upper tier of things that happen that you just really hold on to as great takeaways from the experience.
There are a lot of moments like that. I remember earlier on in the year, my visit to Death Valley, which was actually the first time I'd ever been there. It's one of the few big parks out west that I had never visited before. But I had 3 nights camping in Death Valley, and this was in a few weeks after the government was reopened, and so it was one of the first big park experiences that I had that really felt like a normal park experience. Things were back to normal, and I just remember, I still remember that very, very vividly. It was really beautiful, really extraordinary, and I was really blown away by the magnitude and the sheer beauty of Death Valley National Park. It's any of your listeners who've been there would know, but it's a very desolate place, but there is an incredible beauty in that desolation that really attracted me, and I loved that place a lot. I think a lot about it. It's one of the parks that I'm itching to get back to as soon as possible.
I'm sure at that pace, there's a lot of places you feel that way about, where you could have just stayed longer, but you just had hundreds more to see.
There are a lot of places like that, and of course, for most of the park units, you can always spend more time, and I knew that very well. But that's not what this trip was about. This trip was something a little different, and so I knew that I would have shorter visits at a lot of places where you could easily spend more time. I had another experience. This was during the government shutdown, so this would have been January. I stopped at Congaree National Park. The park was accessible, but it was basically all closed down. Everything was closed. The visitor center was closed. The restrooms were closed. The campground was closed, and all this kind of stuff. And I got there relatively late in the day, and I was the only person in this entire national park. And that is a really crazy thing, because that never happens. And so I spent, hour and a half or 2 hours hiking around in this incredible park with nobody, no rangers, no other visitors, nothing, nobody. And I remember that being so incredibly special, to have this place all to myself. It was also very eerie and kind of creepy at the same time. But that's one of the sort of positive things that came out of the government shutdown, was your opportunity to experience some of these places in a way that you will never ever get again. And I remember that very vividly as well.
Wow. I can't even imagine. I can't imagine a little bit. I was able to visit some parks during the pandemic just nearby, and very few people. almost
Yeah.
no one. And that was a sensation I've never experienced in some of those same spots that would be usually filled with people. So I can't imagine all the things you got to see. Golly. So I mean, I don't even know how to capture all this in one conversation, but you just saw the most incredibly epic places in one single year. How did you process it? What were you doing to kind of make sure that you like remembered this and shared it and just captured it as best you can to think about for years to come?
That's a good question. And just sort of on a personal internal level, the truth is here I am almost a full year out from the beginning of the trip, and I am still processing the trip. I am
Mm.
still remembering moments and events and things that I did. It's so much input in such a short amount of time. It is very difficult to kind of process the whole thing. But while I was doing it, I I took tons and tons of photographs. I'm a sort of a amateur photographer, and it's one of my hobbies. And I shot somewhere around 250,000 photographs last year in the
Jeez.
parks. And I also did a lot of audio recordings. I kept a daily journal, and I wrote a blog every 10 days about the experience. And, all of those kind of little elements that I employed to kind of record the moments of the trip, they added up to a lot. And so I ended up generating 4 terabytes of data last year on the trip.
Oh
I had to
gosh.
had to buy 2 new hard drives along the way just to be able to store everything. I've spent a good part of this year after the trip going back through and sifting through all of that content that I created. It's so much, it's so much stuff.
4 terabytes, man. I mean, it's worth it. These places are worth it to me. Be trigger happy when you're in such incredible places. What were some of the reactions you got from people, either from family or just from people you came across out on the trip?
When I first floated the idea to my friends and family, everybody who knows me said, "Oh yeah, you should do that." Nobody questioned it. Nobody second guessed it. The people close to me, they knew that I was in a state of mind at the time where I needed a diversion, and so I think they were happy for me to go away and take on something interesting. Once the news of it, the trip sort of got out onto social media and stuff, the reactions were more mixed, and I think that I think a lot of people, I got a lot of kind of negative comments from people thinking that I was an idiot or doing something foolish, or people that took it really personal that I was trying to fit in all the parks in one year as opposed to spending, a week or 2 weeks at a time in any given place. But that's not what the trip was about, again, like I said. So, but once I got rolling and once I started sharing the experience on social media, I think it found its audience, or an audience found it, and it kind of took on a life of its own. And before too long, I really felt like the trip was bigger than me and was something that I was not only proud and responsible for sharing, but something that I was that it almost became my obligation to share it, if that makes any sense. That I was doing something that a lot of people were interested in, and it was my responsibility to share that to the best of my ability.
That blows me away, the negative feedback. I can get it because we get that too with this show, with people doing challenges, trying to run across the Grand Canyon faster than anybody, fastest known times. And once you get it into your head that no amount of time in any national park will ever be enough, then you can kind of just say, I mean, personally, I've driven hours just to see Yosemite Valley on a work trip, for instance, just to see the valley, turn around. That's because that's all
Yeah.
I had time for. It's worth it. It's worth an 8 hour drive. It's worth whatever you can do to just see a scene in a national park to me. And to be able to fit them all in a year, of course, you don't get to spend as much time as you should or you want to. But that, yeah, like you said, that's not what it's about. And the fact that you got to experience all this and cram it in a medium no one else can really relate to is just, I find it mind blowing, man. I just find it mind blowing. Was there a cluster of parks outside of Death Valley, or an area or a type of area that just that just really captured you?
Well, in general, the Alaska parks, almost taken as a whole, are just, they're so extraordinary. And I'd never been to Alaska before, and so the whole experience was new for me. And I drove up there, partly because I wanted that experience as well. I wanted to understand the distance and the time it took to get there, and I wanted to see British Columbia and the Yukon Territory.
Yeah, not too shabby themselves, are
Not too
they?
shabby, not at all. But you know, when I think about those parks, I think about the word wilderness, and we like to think that we have unbridled wilderness areas here in the lower 48, and the truth is we do have some, and a lot of those areas are within some of our larger national parks. But until you get up there and see some of these places that, I'm thinking like, uh, uh, Gates of the Arctic National Park and Aniakchak National Monument, which is our least visited park with an average of 100 visitors a year. These places that have, zero infrastructure whatsoever. I mean it, like no visitor centers, no roads. You can't drive there. You have to fly on a bush plane. No trails of any kind, no signage of any kind, no electricity, no cell phone signal, no camping areas. GPS probably won't work. When you get to some of these places, it's you and the pilot and the plane and whatever you guys brought with you, and everything else is pure unadulterated wilderness. It's these areas, these are the most sort of rudimentary elemental places that I've ever been to, and some of the most wonderfully preserved wilderness that we have left in this country. It's air, water, earth, ice, and bears that want to eat you. I mean, it's just like, it's so insane. And when you experience that, it, at least for me, it really shifted my perspective and my understanding of what I thought wilderness was.
Do you have a story that you could share with us of just an experience, either with a person or animal, or just something humorous that happened out there that kind of can encapsulate adventure?
There's so many stories. I don't know. I'll talk about my flight out to Aniakchak National Monument. It's a 6 mile wide volcanic crater, half a mile deep, and it's out on the Alaska Peninsula, pretty far away from everything else. And it's our least visited park unit for two reasons. One is because it's incredibly remote. You have to hire a pilot to take you out there. And second, because the weather there is eternally crappy. And the weather is so bad that the pilots won't fly out there most of the time. So if you want to go and visit this place, there's a really good chance that you have to sit at King Salmon, Alaska, for a few days waiting for the weather to be good enough for the pilot to fly you out there. I got super, super lucky, as I did with a lot of things on this trip. And as soon as I arrived in King Salmon, they picked me up and took me straight to the plane because the weather was perfect, and we flew right out there. But flying out into the middle of nowhere in a little Cessna plane, float plane, with a crazy pilot who I mean, all the pilots up there are crazy and they're extremely skilled, and it's a real joy to ride with them. But you fly out. I mean, it's insane to even think about it. You fly out into the middle of nowhere. You see the crater on the horizon ringed with clouds, and it's basically just this giant stone bowl that just sort of sits in the clouds. And you get closer and you get closer, and then you fly over the rim of this crater down into it, and the pilot circles the plane around the rim of the crater, descending altitude the whole time, and then he lands on this mint green lake in the middle of the volcanic crater and parks the plane on a beach. And you know, we stopped, and I said, can I get out and hike? And he said, you can do whatever you want to, just don't take too long. And I said, okay, I'm going to go hike. And he said, I'm going to sit here and watch the weather. And I got out and I hiked around, took some photographs, and came back, and we flew back out of the crater. I mean, it just, and we were probably the only two people in at least a 50-mile radius, if not more. Just insane.
Imagine just the feeling to you know, if you were planning this for him to fly off and just leave you there. I mean, the way you describe it, I actually don't know about this park. I have to look it up. Sounds, I mean, I otherworldly. Like, you probably hard to believe that it's the same country you live in.
It is. Yes, all of those things. Otherworldly is a really good description, you know. And it's moments like that. You know, you asked me about sort of decompressing the trip, and it's moments like that that I'm still like processing, because you know, you're out there and you're doing it, and in a way, you're kind of fighting the clock. You're fighting with the weather. You're at the mercy of a pilot who's thinking about 10,000 different things that you're not thinking about, and so you get out there and you do it, and it's incredible. But it's only later that you sit back and you think about how extraordinary that whole thing was, and how extraordinary and lucky you are to have been there and to be able to do it and to see a place that so few people get to see.
Just that one park puts you in
Just
a realm that literally 100 people a year can join. That's
right.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. So let's jump to maybe around, you know, summertime, right around when you were in Alaska. How was the trip going? Were you staying on course? Was your truck running well? Was the plan working? Were you having a good time? What was it looking like?
For the most part, it did seem to be going okay. You know, right before I got to Alaska, like a week or two out, when I was in the Northwest in Oregon and Washington, I got a call from my travel agent who said that the company that we used to book all of my reservations in Alaska had mysteriously gone out of business. And she couldn't contact anybody there, and she wasn't confident in what items on my itinerary had actually been paid for or not. I paid this company in advance, so I had already forked out the money. So it was a little tenuous there for a couple of weeks, trying to figure out what was booked and what was not booked. It ended up all working out. You know, it's moments like that, you know, but you don't let it get to you. You're going to go and you're going to do it. It just, and everything worked out fine. But I don't even remember what your original question was, Mason. Sorry.
No, just how it was going at that point. That's definitely stressful.
It was stressful, but part of my MO for this whole trip was just roll with it, roll with whatever happens. And I was, you know, trying to remove my controlled tendencies and just let the trip be what the trip is. And while it was sort of personally important to me to finish it and hit all the parks, I knew that if I didn't, I would still have an incredible experience to remember. And that's what was important.
Absolutely. So what's one thing you learned about America through this experience?
I learned so much about this country. And I think that is my biggest takeaway from this whole trip, that a couple of things, but most notably that when you take the national park system as a whole in totality, it really is like the greatest overview of the United States of America that you can get anywhere. And I had never really considered that before. I very used to traipsing around and camping in the bigger, national park sites and national monuments and rec areas and that kind of stuff. But also diving into all those historical places, uh, learning a lot more about the Civil War when I thought that I already had a good grasp on it. World War II, all these kinds of things, Japanese internment camps. The National Park Service. It's not all, waterfalls and snow-capped mountains. There's a lot of history, both good and bad, and to be able to dive into all of it and really absorb it and learn it was a tremendous gift. And it changed my perspective on this country in a lot of different ways. But it also gave me a real renewed sense of the diversity in the country, not just, and I don't mean just like cultural diversity, and there's plenty of that on display as well within the national park system, but also the diversity in our our land and our geography. The trip took me to all 50 states. It took me from the Caribbean to the other side of the international date line. It took me from north of the Arctic Circle to south of the equator. And everything is rolled up into that. The deserts, the mountains, the rivers, the seashores and lake shores, the wetlands, the plains and the prairie, everything that you can imagine. It's really tremendous. And when you have all of this experience put on your plate at one time, you get a very clear picture of what the United States of America is.
That was beautiful. I'm gonna use that for the show intro little carrot that we play. That was incredible. Man, when you put the boundaries on the geography of where you went, you saw everything, the vastness of what the planet itself has to offer, from tropics to the Arctic to below sea level to some of the highest summits in the hemisphere. And to be able to experience that all in one country is pretty mind-boggling. And to be able to do it all within a year, I'm just still, I know I keep saying it, I'm sure listeners are tired of it, I'm just blown away. How did you end the experience? And what was it like coming through, the fall? Where were you going? And what was that feeling like as you approached kind of the last quarter of the trip?
The last bit of the trip was spent mostly in the Northeast and the New England states, and then coming back down towards my home in St. Louis. Up there in the sort of northeastern cities, and especially in like Washington, D.C., the parks are much smaller in general, and they're clustered very tightly together. And you can actually visit a lot of them very quickly. So, for example, in one day in Washington, D.C., I visited 10 national park units. First off, I've been to D.C. many times before, and so I've already seen all these spots before. But even with that, I still felt like I spent, a decent amount of time at each place. And I'm talking about like the Jefferson Memorial, Martin Luther King Memorial, Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument, Vietnam Veterans Memorial, Korean War Veterans Memorial, all those little places around the National Mall. They're all individual national park units. And I knew that there were going to be times on the trip where I could fit several visits into a day comfortably. And that helped me balance out longer visits in some of the other places that I wanted to spend more time, or places that took longer to get to. And then wound my way back down to the Midwest. I spent December most of December. I went back to the Virgin Islands for a quick trip to pick up a few parks there that were closed in January. And then I headed out to the Pacific where I visited parks in Guam, four of the Hawaiian Islands, and American Samoa. And then I came back and had my last park stop, which was number 419, was here in my home. It was Gateway Arch National Park.
Right there in your backyard.
Right there in my backyard, yeah.
Did you tell anybody when you completed it? Did you tell anybody at the Park Service?
It's interesting. By that time, some folks at the Park Service had caught wind of what I was doing, and actually, Gateway Arch National Park reached out to me earlier in the year, and to see if they could do something a little more special for my arrival. And it's when I got down there on New Year's Eve for my last park visit, there was a throng of reporters and press and park rangers and lots of random folks from town who came down to say hi and to meet me. It was pretty special.
Wow. What an incredible experience. Let me ask you this. On January 1st, you wake up, nowhere to go. What do you do? What do you do? What do you start doing after that?
So I'm not a young man. I was 47 when I finished the trip. What I didn't realize, well, I kind of started to feel it towards the end, but what I didn't really realize was how exhausted I was by the experience. And it was only after I finished the trip and was able to sort of chill at home for a little while that I realized how much it had taken out of me. The best way I can describe it is it feels like I spent 2 years worth of energy in 1 year. And in some ways I'm still kind of recovering from that a little bit. In a sort of ironic sort of way, the coronavirus, shutdown and the measures we've been taking have kind of been a blessing to me because I've been able to sit at home and recoup and get my life put back together after the trip and things like that. So that's been kind of nice.
Obviously, a trip like this takes so much time to process, like you've been saying, and a break is welcome. And good thing you didn't plan it for 2020. That's
no kidding.
Oh,
no
geez.
kidding.
That wouldn't have been a possibility, I guess.
I don't think it would have been doable.
No, I don't think it would have been. The amount that you're moving around and interacting with communities, and the fact that the parks weren't just closed, they were closed. And yeah, what great timing in a lot of ways. So the shutdown was just a bump in the road in comparison, looking back.
Yeah, it was. The shutdown was a bump in the road. And of course, when you're in the middle of it, it feels like the end of the world when you're trying to execute a trip like this. And I spent a lot of time fretting over it when I was in the middle of it. But pretty quickly after it was over, and I felt like I was getting the trip back on track and it was becoming what I intended it for it to be, I got over that pretty quickly. And yeah, looking back, sitting here in 2020, looking back, it definitely just feels like this minor blip.
Where does your mind go from here? You've seen all the parks. Well, there's 423 now, like you said. There might be a few that you still need to see. I'm not sure. Where do you go planning-wise? Do you just let that come to you at some point, or is your mind working towards anything?
I am thinking a lot about returning to some of the places that I'd like to go back to. Death Valley. I'd like to figure out a trip back up to Alaska sometime before too long. And a lot of little parks, here and there dotted around the country that I'd like to get back to, or places. There's a good handful of places that I visited on the trip where I got there and I'm like, oh yeah, there's more to see here than I expected, and I don't really have the time to do it right, with what I'm doing right now, and I want to come back and see more. Or there's a trail or a road that I really wanted to do, but didn't quite have the time, or the weather was bad, or one thing or another. So it's a lot of little things like that in parks all over, big ones and little ones, that are sort of calling me back. And I suspect I'll spend, the rest of my good years going back to a lot of those places.
I imagine. So, I know it's kind of backtracking here, but I'd love to ask: was there a park in particular that stuck out to you as maybe my kind of more one of the more bizarre parks, or kind of out of the box parks, or a place that just really surprised you?
There were a lot of surprises. You know, some of the ones that surprised me the most were parks that have a very heavy emotional impact. And those are some of the ones that I wasn't really expecting or prepared for. And I'm talking about like Manzanar National Historic Site in California, which preserves the site of a Japanese internment camp during World War II. And we actually have 4 park units that are dedicated to the history of Japanese American internment. That one in particular, the Sand Creek Massacre site in Colorado, which is a relatively new park and has barely anything going on there right now. Uh, that's one of the most intense park experiences I've ever had. Just incredibly emotional experience. The Flight 93 Memorial in Pennsylvania, also incredibly moving. And one of the one of the ones that really surprised me the most was Kalawapapa National Historic Site in Hawaii. And this is a park that's a little difficult to access. And it's the only park unit that we have that has an age restriction. You have to be 16 or older to visit. It's the site of a leper colony. Something around 8,000 lepers were more or less imprisoned on this peninsula in Hawaii for over 100 years, throughout a 100-year period. And most of them died there. And it's so hard to even describe, but it's an incredibly beautiful place. It's one of the most beautiful places I visited last year, but it's also one of the saddest and just uncompromising emotional places that I visited last year. It's those kinds of places that really stuck with me. Johnstown Flood National Historic Site. There's a handful of them. Those were the ones that really surprised me. Those sort of deeper dives into some moments in American history. The Port Chicago Naval Magazine National Memorial, which is in the Bay Area in California, also very difficult to get to. Has about 600 visitors a year. You have to apply in advance, 2 weeks in advance, for a security clearance to go there because it's on an active military base. And then you have to apply for a tour to go out there, and they don't run the tours every day. So anyway, it's places like that just really kind of hit me in a way that I wasn't expecting. And that's not even to take into account, the emotional thrill of, hiking on a glacier in Wrangell St. Elias National Park, or sitting at Brooks Falls and watching the coastal brown bears catch salmon right out of the river and eat them. There's the whole trip is just filled with, getting to help lower and fold the gigantic American flag at the end of the day that flies over Fort McHenry. There's just a zillion moments like that, seeing a pod of orcas swim through Kenai Forge National Park, all these kinds of things. Every day was filled with moments like this that, over an entire lifetime would shape an individual. But to have all that condensed into 1 year it's almost more than you can bear.
Just hearing about it, I can't imagine. Unbelievable. Andy, this is probably one of the most impressive accomplishments, and I'm not often jealous of people. I'm jealous of this. It's I know that there's we're not even scratching the surface on the work that went into it, the preparation, or what what led you to this in life to have this opportunity, but just congratulations on taking full advantage of it. I don't think there's anyone out there who's had a year of their life so filled with so much life. So you should be able to sip on that for the rest of your days.
I hope so, Mason. I appreciate that very much. The journey was very personal for me, and I undertook it for personal reasons, but it means so much to me that it means something to others. And I get a lot of pride out of that.
Well, we're fans of it here in the Gravely household, 100%. So let us know. This is something that people can also enjoy now through your pictures and through your website. Do you mind sharing where folks can just see what you did and maybe get in touch if that's something you're interested in?
Absolutely. Before the trip, I set up a website, and it's called 418parks.com. That's number 418parks.com. And I've got select photos and blog that I'm relatively proud of on the website, and they can also contact me through the website if they're interested. If anybody is on Facebook, I'm pretty good at keeping up with my 418 Parks Facebook page. Just posted something today. And you can scroll back through that. I was pretty active almost every day on Facebook most every day during the trip, updating photographs and parts of the experience. And then also 418 Parks on Instagram, which is more or less inactive right now, but there's a nice catalog of photographs on my Instagram feed.
I can second that. The pictures are amazing. I just loved seeing the updates. And it was a year-long experience for you and a year-long experience for folks following along. So Andy, thank you for joining the Adventure Sports Podcast. I'll let you know when the episode comes out. It's usually about a month or so after recording that we release it. And I'll email you and we'll go from there.
Oh, sounds good. Thank you so much, Mason. It's really great to talk to you.
Yeah. Let me know if you're ever down in Florida.
Oh, man. I come back down to Florida, I'm going to hook up with you and buy you a beer.
Oh, hey, I work at a brewery, so that'll work out just
fine. Oh, outstanding. Outstanding. All right, Mason. Thank you so much, man.
Have a great day.
Great to talk to you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See ya. First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to growing the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.